Welcome to an exploration of cognitive science, philosophy, and computer science through the eyes of one of its most influential scholars. Douglas Hofstadter, a distinguished American scholar, has made significant contributions to the fields of cognitive science, philosophy, and computer science. Born on February 15, 1945, Hofstadter is best known for his Pulitzer Prize-winning book Gödel, Escher, Bach, An Eternal Golden Braid, which explores the deep connections between the works of mathematician Kurt Gödel, artist M.C. Escher, and composer Johann Sebastian Bach. Hofstadter's work often delves into the nature of consciousness, self-reference, and the complexity of human cognition. A Strange Loop, another of his seminal works, investigates the paradoxical nature of self-awareness and the intricate loops that constitute the human sense of self. Today, we examine the interrelationships between concepts such as self, consciousness, and identity, as Hofstadter explained in A Strange Loop, providing profound insights into the architecture of the mind. The concepts of self, consciousness, and identity are central to our understanding of what it means to be human. The self is our sense of being an individual, distinct from others and the environment. Consciousness refers to our awareness of ourselves and our surroundings, encompassing our thoughts, emotions, and perceptions. Identity is the way we define ourselves, including our beliefs, values, and experiences. Together, these concepts create a cohesive understanding of our existence. In A Strange Loop, Douglas Hofstadter illustrates how the self, consciousness, and identity are deeply interlinked and mutually defining. The self emerges as a property of consciousness, continuously shaped by self-perception and identity. Hofstadter posits that, in the end, we self-perceiving, self-inventing, locked-in mirages are little miracles of self-reference. This demonstrates that self, consciousness, and identity coexist in a dynamic interplay where each element sustains the others. This triad encourages reflection on how their identity and sense of self are products of their conscious experiences and vice versa, fostering a deeper appreciation of the intricate construction of their reality. Unconscious processes, non-self and non-identity, refer to aspects of the mind that operate without conscious awareness. Unconscious processes are mental activities that occur without our awareness, influencing our thoughts and behaviors. Non-self refers to the absence of a distinct individual identity, a state where self-awareness is not present. Non-identity is the lack of a defined sense of self, where personal attributes and characteristics do not coalesce into a unified identity. These concepts highlight a different mode of mental operation. In the absence of self, consciousness, and identity, unconscious processes operate in a balanced state without the complexity of self-referential loops. Hofstadter explains that the unconscious mind is not a blank slate, but a complex machine operating without the self-referential feedback that gives rise to identity. This equilibrium reflects a state where the defining features of self and identity are absent, allowing unconscious processes to dominate and maintain harmony. Understanding this can help recognize the role of unconscious processes in daily life and their contribution to mental balance when not influenced by conscious identity. Symbol systems, self-perception, and looping structure are key to understanding how we construct our sense of self. Symbol systems include language, numbers, and other forms of representation that allow us to communicate and think abstractly. Self-perception is our awareness and understanding of ourselves, shaped by our experiences and reflections. A looping structure refers to the recursive nature of thought processes where outputs of one process become inputs for another, creating a feedback loop that reinforces self-awareness. Symbol systems such as language and thought patterns create self-perception, reinforcing the looping structures that enable self-reference and generate more symbols. Hofstadter notes, our thoughts are composed of symbols and our consciousness is a dance of these symbols within the brain's loops. This recursive process underpins self-awareness and continuous symbol generation, recognizing the significance of self-referential thoughts and how they reinforce self-perception can enhance intentional self-awareness and personal growth. The absence of self-reference, lack of self-awareness, and absence of self-symbols describe a state where the mind does not engage in self-reflective processes. Without self-reference, there is no mechanism for the mind to turn inward and recognize itself. A lack of self-awareness means there is no conscious acknowledgement of one's thoughts and feelings. The absence of self-symbols indicates that the mind does not generate the internal representations necessary for self-recognition, resulting in a feedback loop that perpetuates this state. Without self-reference, self-awareness cannot develop, leading to the absence of self-symbols. This lack creates a feedback loop perpetuating the absence of self-reference. Hofstadter states, "Without the reflective loop, there is no I to speak of, no awareness to anchor the symbols that define us." This insight helps identify moments of diminished self-awareness and understand the importance of self-referential loops in maintaining a sense of self, encouraging practices that break this feedback loop of absence. Neuronal activity, symbol creation, and the emergence of I are foundational to understanding how the brain produces consciousness. Neuronal activity refers to the electrical and chemical processes in the brain's neurons. Symbol creation involves generating mental representations that carry meaning, such as words and images. The emergence of I is the process by which these neuronal activities and symbols coalesce into a coherent sense of self, giving rise to personal identity and conscious experience. Neuronal activity causes the creation of symbols, leading to the emergence of the I. Hofstadter explains, "The I emerges from a symphony of neurons firing in harmony, creating the symbols that tell the story of our consciousness." This causal relationship illustrates how the interplay of neurons results in the phenomenon of self. Appreciating this complex causal chain underscores the importance of brain health and cognitive function in forming their sense of self and conscious experience. The lack of symbol processing, no emergence of self, and basic neuronal activity describe a state where the brain functions at a fundamental level without higher cognitive processes. Without symbol processing, the brain cannot generate the meaningful representations necessary for thought. This prevents the emergence of self, where a coherent identity and consciousness do not form. Basic neuronal activity refers to the simple, essential operations of neurons without the complexity required for consciousness. Without symbol processing, the self does not emerge, and the system reverts to basic neuronal activity, lacking the complexity needed to generate consciousness. Hofstadter asserts, in the absence of symbol processing, the brain's activity remains rudimentary, devoid of the emergent self that defines conscious experience. Understanding this helps appreciate the essential role of cognitive processes in forming their identity and recognize the impact of disruptions on their sense of self. Non-linear. Feedback loops, consciousness, and higher-order symbols are critical to understanding the complexity of thought processes. Feedback loops involve recursive processes where outputs are fed back as inputs, creating dynamic systems. Consciousness is the awareness of oneself and the environment, characterized by thoughts, perceptions, and feelings. Higher-order symbols are abstract representations that facilitate complex thinking, such as language and mathematics, which emerge from and contribute to conscious experience. Consciousness arises from complex, non-linear feedback loops that create higher-order symbols. Hofstadter describes this process, stating, "Consciousness arises from a non-linear web of feedback loops, each contributing to the higher-order symbols that make up our thoughts." These interactions are not straightforward but generate the dynamic nature of conscious thought. This triad encourages reflection on the non-linear nature of thoughts and experiences, recognizing the complexity and richness of their conscious mind. Retrospective. Non-conscious systems, simple feedback loops, and basic symbol recognition describe processes that occur without conscious awareness. Non-conscious systems operate without self-awareness, performing tasks automatically. Simple feedback loops involve basic, straightforward processes where outputs are directly fed back as inputs. Basic symbol recognition refers to the ability to identify and respond to simple patterns or signals without engaging in complex, reflective thought. Non-conscious systems operate using simple feedback loops that enable basic symbol recognition without generating complex consciousness. Hofstadter explains, basic symbol recognition in non-conscious systems operates through straightforward feedback loops, without the recursive depth of self-aware thought. This understanding helps differentiate between basic pattern recognition and higher-order conscious processing, appreciating the sophistication of human consciousness. Inclusive. Self-referential symbols, conscious thought, and emergent identity are integral to understanding how the self develops. Self-referential symbols are representations that refer to themselves, creating a loop of self-awareness. Conscious thought encompasses the aware and deliberate processing of information. Emergent identity refers to the development of a coherent sense of self through the interaction of these self-referential processes and conscious thoughts. Self-referential symbols are crucial for conscious thought and the emergence of identity. Hofstadter's theory suggests that self-referential symbols are the building blocks of our thoughts, fostering an emergent identity that is perpetually redefined through consciousness. This system continuously supports all these aspects in a reinforcing cycle. This triad emphasizes the importance of self-referential thinking in nurturing self-awareness and identity, encouraging engagement in reflective practices. Exclusive. The absence of conscious thought, lack of self-reference, and no emergent identity describe a state where higher cognitive processes do not occur. Without conscious thought, there is no deliberate awareness or processing of information. A lack of self-reference means the mind does not reflect upon itself. This absence prevents the formation of an emergent identity where a cohesive sense of self does not develop. Without conscious thought, there is no self-reference, leading to no emergent identity. Hofstadter explains that when conscious thought is absent, the loop of self-reference breaks, leaving no room for an emergent identity to form. This exclusive relationship highlights the necessity of these elements for identity. Recognizing this helps understand the importance of conscious reflection in forming and maintaining identity. Conjoined. The concepts of self, mind, and symbols are intertwined in creating a cohesive sense of being. The self is our sense of individual identity and personal experience. The mind encompasses the cognitive processes that enable thought, perception, and understanding. Symbols are representations that carry meaning, such as words, images, and sounds. Together, these elements form an interconnected system that underlies our conscious experience. The mind's symbols together create the self, with each component relying on and reinforcing the others. Hofstadter states, "The mind's symbols are the threads that weave the fabric of the self, each interdependent and reinforcing the tapestry of consciousness." This interconnectedness forms a cohesive system where the mind, symbols, and self are inextricably linked. This triad encourages seeing themselves as an integrated whole, where thoughts, symbols, and self-perception work together to create conscious experience. Bottlenecked. The absence of symbols, no mind, and no self describe a state where cognitive processes do not occur. Without symbols, there are no representations to convey meaning. This absence prevents the formation of the mind, which relies on symbolic processing to function. Consequently, the self cannot emerge as there are no cognitive processes to support self-awareness and identity. Without symbols, there can be no mind and hence no self. Hofstadter notes, in the absence of symbols, the mind cannot form, and the self remains an unrealized potential trapped in a bottleneck of non-emergence. This lack of symbolic processing creates a bottleneck, preventing the emergence of the mind and self. Understanding this helps appreciate the role of symbolic thought in maintaining a healthy mind and self, emphasizing the need for rich symbolic and cognitive engagement. Harmonic. The concepts of mind, symbols, and feedback loops are crucial for understanding the harmonious nature of thought. The mind encompasses cognitive processes and the ability to think and perceive. Symbols are representations that carry meaning, facilitating communication and thought. Feedback loops involve recursive processes where outputs are fed back as inputs, creating dynamic systems. Together, these elements create a balanced and coherent experience of consciousness. The mind and symbols create feedback loops, leading to a harmonic system where each element supports the other in dynamic balance. Hofstadter describes this harmony. Our minds are harmonies of symbols and feedback loops, each playing a part in the symphony of consciousness. This balance is essential for the coherent experience of consciousness. This analogy helps understand the importance of balance and harmony in thoughts and self-perception, fostering a more integrated and harmonious sense of self. Dissonant. Disruption in feedback loops, no cohesive symbols, and a fragmented mind describe a state where cognitive processes are disorganized. Feedback loops are essential for maintaining dynamic balance, and their disruption leads to chaos. Without cohesive symbols, there is no meaningful representation of thoughts. This disorganization results in a fragmented mind, where cognitive processes do not integrate into a coherent experience. Disruption in feedback loops prevents the creation of cohesive symbols, resulting in a fragmented mind. Hofstadter explains, when feedback loops are disrupted, the mind's symbols lose their coherence, resulting in a fragmented and dissonant consciousness. This dissonance disrupts the integrated experience of consciousness. Recognizing this helps identify factors that disrupt cognitive feedback loops, striving to maintain mental coherence and reduce fragmentation. Convergent. Neurons, the mind, and symbols are fundamental components that converge to create consciousness. Neurons are the brain cells that transmit information through electrical and chemical signals. The mind encompasses cognitive processes and the ability to think and perceive. Symbols are representations that convey meaning. Together, these elements interact and support each other, leading to the emergence of conscious experience. Neurons, the mind, and symbols converge to create consciousness. Hofstadter states, consciousness is the convergence of neurons, mind, and symbols, each interlocking to form the essence of our awareness. Each element supports and contributes to the others, leading to an integrated experience of being. This triad encourages recognition of the interconnectedness of neural, cognitive, and symbolic processes in creating conscious experience. Divergent. No neural coherence, fragmented symbols, and a disjointed mind describe a state where cognitive processes are not integrated. Neural coherence refers to the synchronization of neuronal activity, which is necessary for coordinated thought. Without it, symbols become fragmented, lacking consistent meaning. This fragmentation leads to a disjointed mind, where cognitive processes do not align to create a unified consciousness. Without neural coherence, symbols become fragmented, and the mind remains disjointed. Hofstadter explains, a lack of neural coherence leads to fragmented symbols, leaving the mind disjointed and preventing the emergence of a unified self. This divergence prevents the emergence of a unified consciousness. Understanding this helps work towards achieving neural coherence and symbolic integration for a more unified and stable sense of self. Combination. Self-awareness, symbol manipulation, and recursive loops are essential for understanding the complexity of thought. Self-awareness is the conscious recognition of one's own existence and thought processes. Symbol manipulation involves using and transforming symbols to convey meaning and solve problems. Recursive loops are processes where outputs are fed back as inputs, creating self-reinforcing systems. Together, these elements create a sophisticated and dynamic consciousness. Self-awareness and symbol manipulation interact in recursive loops, creating a complex system where each component is crucial yet distinct. Hofstadter states, self-awareness arises from the manipulation of symbols within recursive loops, each layer adding complexity to the system of consciousness. This interaction forms the foundation of consciousness. Appreciating the complexity of their self-awareness and engaging in reflective practices can enhance understanding and manipulation of symbols. Division. The lack of self-awareness, no recursive loops, and simple symbol use describe a state where cognitive processes are basic and unreflective. Without self-awareness, there is no conscious recognition of one's own existence and thoughts. The absence of recursive loops prevents the creation of self-reinforcing systems. This limitation leads to simple symbol use, where symbols are employed in straightforward, non-complex ways. The absence of self-awareness and recursive loops leads to simple symbol use without complex consciousness. Hofstadter notes, without recursive loops and self-awareness, the mind resorts to simple symbol use, devoid of the complexity that defines higher consciousness. This division prevents the emergence of higher-order thought. Recognizing this highlights the importance of self-awareness in achieving higher-order cognitive processes and a more sophisticated understanding of the self. Association. Cognitive processes, symbol integration, and emergent identity are key to understanding the formation of the self. Cognitive processes include all mental activities related to thinking, knowing, and remembering. Symbol integration involves combining different symbols to create meaningful representations. Emergent identity refers to the development of a coherent sense of self through the interaction of cognitive processes and integrated symbols. Cognitive processes and symbol integration lead to an emergent identity, with each process reinforcing the others. Hofstadter suggests, our identity emerges from the association of cognitive processes and symbol integration, each reinforcing the other in a dance of self-realization. This association creates a cohesive sense of self. Focusing on enhancing cognitive processes and symbol integration can help cultivate a stronger and more cohesive identity. Disassociation. The lack of cognitive integration, fragmented symbols, and no emergent self describe a state where the mind does not function cohesively. Without cognitive integration, mental processes do not combine to create meaningful thoughts. Fragmented symbols lack coherent meaning, disrupting thought processes. This disorganization prevents the emergence of a cohesive self, where identity does not form effectively. Without cognitive integration, symbols remain fragmented, preventing the emergence of a cohesive self. Hofstadter explains, in the absence of cognitive integration, symbols fragment, and the self fails to emerge, lost in the disassociation of thought. This disassociation disrupts the formation of identity. Understanding this helps recognize and address disruptions in cognitive processes to maintain a coherent sense of identity. Integration. Neuronal networks, symbolic thought, and conscious identity are essential components of self-awareness. Neuronal networks refer to the interconnected neurons in the brain that facilitate communication and processing. Symbolic thought involves using symbols to represent ideas and concepts. Conscious identity is the awareness of oneself as a distinct individual, formed through the integration of neuronal activity and symbolic thought. Neuronal networks and symbolic thought integrate to form a conscious identity. Hofstadter states, the integration of neuronal networks and symbolic thought creates our conscious identity, each element indispensable to the other's existence. This integration is the cornerstone of self-awareness. This triad emphasizes the importance of integrated neuronal and symbolic processes in maintaining a conscious identity, encouraging them to nurture these aspects for a cohesive self. Disintegration. Disrupted neuronal activity, no symbolic thought, and fragmented identity describe a state where the mind fails to function cohesively. Disrupted neuronal activity prevents effective communication between neurons. Without symbolic thought, there are no meaningful representations of ideas. This disorganization leads to a fragmented identity, where the sense of self is not cohesive or stable. Disrupted neuronal activity prevents symbolic thought, leading to a fragmented identity and the disintegration of consciousness. Hofstadter explains, disrupted neuronal activity halts symbolic thought, resulting in a fragmented identity and the disintegration of consciousness itself. This breakdown underscores the fragility of the self. Understanding this highlights the need to maintain healthy neuronal activity and symbolic thought to preserve a unified and stable identity. Conclusion. Douglas Hofstadter's exploration of the mind through a strange loop offers a profound understanding of the intricate and interdependent nature of self, consciousness, and identity. By examining these concepts through various triads, Hofstadter illustrates how our sense of self is an emergent property of complex, recursive processes within the brain. The interplay between neuronal activity, symbol creation, and feedback loops underscores the dynamic and often non-linear nature of consciousness. Hofstadter's insights reveal the delicate balance required to maintain a cohesive identity and highlight the fragility of the self when these processes are disrupted. Through his work, Hofstadter encourages us to appreciate the sophisticated architecture of our minds and the continuous dance of symbols that construct our conscious experience.